Last week on the Pick and Roll podcast, episode 106, me and my compadres thought of an idea of listing off our 5 greatest players from each NBA team. I decided to take the initiative and go ahead and do my own list, going through all the teams for my channel. We still may not do that on the network. Either way, for the Pick and Roll podcast, either way, I'm going to do my own list. So for my own list, I'm going to start off, as you can read by the title, with my 5 greatest Atlanta Hawks of all time. And for each of these teams, there's the conditions that are going to apply are I can only use each player one time. But that's going to make some list a little tricky, like the Miami Heat. Because I'm only going to use LeBron James one time. But it also makes it a little more of a challenge, too. You got to think a little bit if you can only use a certain player for one team. Like, if you can only use LeBron once, it makes you think a little bit between, pretty much everyone would agree that LeBron James would be considered the greatest Cav of all time. That makes you think a little bit. What do you do with the 5 greatest Heat players of all time under that condition? So that's how I'm going to do my list. Some people may like it. Some people may not be a fan of it. But either way, hey, I'm going to do this list. If you guys want to, and watch any of these videos, want to put your top 5 players for any team under whatever conditions. You can either go by my conditions of using a player once or being able to use them for multiple teams. Whatever the case may be, feel free to put your top 5 players for each team in the comments of these videos. I'm going to create a playlist for it. So without any further ado, let's just dive right into it. My 5 greatest Atlanta Hawks of all time. I'm going to start off with an honorable mention. I'm going to go with Trae Young. Trae Young's a multi-time All-Star, good three-point shooter. He's been one of the top player and the lead guy for the Atlanta Hawks recently. But I'm not going to consider him a top 5 quite yet. Maybe a year or two it come back to this, he could crack the top 5. But as of now, I'm going to put Trae Young as an honorable mention as of right now. And I'm going to also put Spudd Webb as kind of an honorable mention. He was one of those great dunkers, but he wasn't really a great all-around player. There's another one that's a good honorable mention for this. But now, without any further ado, we're going to get into the top 5 right now, going from 5 to 1. So with that, let's start. My number 5 is Joe Johnson. He played with the Hawks from 2007 to 2012, made the All-Star team every season he was there. For his career, he's a 7-time All-Star, 6 with the Atlanta Hawks. He was taken with the number 10 pick back in the 2001 draft out of Arkansas, but he's most famously remembered for being a good scorer with the Atlanta Hawks. Sometimes people joked about him not having a good personality for marketing, but hey, he was, he found his niche in Atlanta. He had some of his best individual seasons there, and as a result, I got to give him the nod here. Because he also played a role in helping the Atlanta Hawks beat the Miami Heat in the opening round of the 2009 playoffs in 7 games when Dwayne Wade had a scoring title, and he was the lead dog for that team. I got to give Joe Johnson nods for that. He was one of those pretty good all-around Hawks players, somewhat underrated looking back on it. But, hey, that's my number 5. My number 4, I'm going to go back a little bit. This is going to go back to the pre-Jordan years. Lou Hudson from the old St. Louis Hawks. And yes, I'm counting St. Louis and Atlanta Hawks together. And he was the 4th pick of the 1966 NBA draft. He was a 6-time All-Star and one of the perennial scorers during that time. Helped keep the Hawks relevant. And, now he wasn't there for a championship run, which 2 of my other players on this list were. But he was one of the forgotten names and one of the pre-Bird Johnson, pre-Bill Russell, pre-Jordan, all that era, who deserves a nod. Well, actually, he was the Bill Russell era. But now, we're getting into number 3. One of the players that was on that championship team, Cliff Hagen. He was a 3rd rounder out of Kentucky. He was part of that 1958 St. Louis Hawks team that won the NBA championship. He was a 5-time All-Star. He was the 2nd man on that team. Now, the lead man on that team, spoiler alert, is coming up. But hey, he was one of those key players. He was consistently got averaged over 20 points a game for his career. He was a key contributor to a championship team in the Atlanta/St. Louis Hawks era. So I got to give him nods. Now, number 2, this might be, some of you might have him as your number 1, but I have him as my number 2. That's Dominque Wilkins. He was taken in the 1982 draft out of Georgia. He initially was drafted by the Utah Jazz, but then was traded to the Hawks. He played his peak years there, 9-time All-Star, 7-time All-NBA, all during his tenure with the Atlanta Hawks. He was the guy that kept that team relevant in the 80s into the early 90s. So multi-time slam dunk contest winner. He had that historic slam dunk contest with Michael Jordan where he fell short of being a 3-time slam dunk champion. Dominque Wilkins is the first player that comes to mind when it comes to the Bird Johnson era onward. And, he certainly was, he was certainly one of the main guys for the Atlanta Hawks franchise. He was the guy that kept people coming to the arenas during the Bird Johnson into the Jordan years for the Hawks and helped keep that franchise relevant and was their go-to guy. He was it during those years for the Atlanta Hawks. Even though they never got over the hump and won a championship, he always kept them in contention. And now I go into my number 1. I'm going to go Bob Pettit, if I'm pronouncing that right. He was taken with the 1954 draft as the number 1 pick out of LSU. He was there when they won their only championship back in 1958 as the St. Louis Hawks. He was an 11-time All-Star, 2-time MVP, one of those dominant players in the early years of the NBA. Back during the NBA and ABA separation, before the merger, before Bill Russell, Wilt Chamberlain, Bird, Johnson, so on and so forth. Bob Pettit, one of those all-time great players whose name doesn't get enough credit. When I looked him up, I thought about, man, he was the real face of the Atlanta Hawks franchise. Back when they were the St. Louis Hawks. He's the one that helped bring them a championship. He was the heart and soul of their original heart and soul of that team's franchise. He has his jersey retired by them. He was it. He was the heart and soul to me of their entire franchise's history. No offense to Dominque Wilkins, but Bob Pettit is that guy. And that's what I got right here for my 5 Atlanta Hawks. You guys, again, comment. Let me know who your 5 are in the comments. Make sure to drop a like and subscribe. Tune in for more of my top 5 greatest players from each team. Coming up next, we got the Boston Celtics. Stay tuned.